talking about? Me. Who they talking about? Me. All they talk about is
Careful who you help, though. Some people don't appreciate help. Some people take help for granted. Some people feel.
America thought this secret would be buried forever. Jadakiss, the soul of the LOX, the man who turned black music into a national symbol, a rebel who dared to poke straight at Hollywood's taboos, a black icon who never bowed his head. But behind those dazzling lights lie dark secrets that left the world stunned. Explosive statements that enraged both the entertainment industry and politics, legal scandals that nearly collapsed his career, and a thorn in the side of the US government. So is Jadakiss an immortal cultural legend, or a man carrying Hollywood's darkest secret? All of it turned Jadakiss into the man Hollywood wanted erased for good. The truth behind Jadakiss's disappearance is darker than you think, and it will all be exposed in this video. Peeling back the curtain. A violent childhood that forged chaos. Jadakiss's real name is Jason Terrence Phillips, born on May 27, 1975. He grew up in Yonkers, New York, in a family that was not perfect, but also not as broken as people often imagine when they hear the phrase street rapper. Jason had both a father and a mother. He had a home to return to. His mother was a hard-working woman with a steady job carrying most of the family's responsibilities. His father had his own issues. He was not the picture-perfect dad from the movies, but he also did not completely disappear. It was a very typical working-class family in satellite cities like Yonkers. Not poor enough to be desperate, but not well off enough to shield their children from reality for long. It was in that context that a crucial decision was made. When Jason was about 12, his parents told him directly that it was time to earn his own money. Not because they could no longer support him, but because they believed the world outside did not run on protection. In Yonkers, if you did not learn to stand on your own early, you could easily get swept away. From that point on, Jason started hustling. Not in a criminal sense, but by finding every legal way possible to make a living. And very quickly, he realized his greatest advantage was his words. On street corners, people gathered to freestyle trade bars, test each other line by line. If you spoke well, people listened. If you spoke better, you got paid. Jason learned freestyle rap to earn cash. Not much, but enough to understand something very early on. Words had real value. Street corner rap was nothing like stage rap. There was no safe space, no second take. Every bar had to come out fast, sharp, and precise enough to hold a crowd's attention. In that environment, Jason learned how to control rhythm control situations, and most importantly, control his place among strangers. It was also through those freestyle sessions that Jason Phillips met Chic Louch and Styles P. They did not meet because they shared dreams of becoming artists. They met because they stood in the same space of survival, rapping together, trading verses, watching each other closely, and realizing trust was possible. The trio gradually formed the group The Warlocks, laying the first bricks for their future hip-hop journey. At a very young age, Jadakiss had already begun drawing attention in the underground. At 12, he entered a freestyle rap competition in Florida, where he caught the attention of people connected to Rough Riders. Not long after his group met Mary J. Blige. Impressed by their lyrics and energy, Mary passed their demo to Puff Daddy, who later signed them to Bad Boy Records. When they signed, Puff Daddy shortened the group's name from the Warlocks to the LOX. They made their first appearance on Main Source's album, What You Think. In 1994, with the track Set It Off, then quickly became familiar pens and voices in the Bad Boy era. The LOX appeared on a string of major hits like It's All About the Benjamins, 24 Hours to Live Honey Last Day, and built a close relationship with the notorious B.I.G., who personally mentored Jadakiss in his early years. After Big's death in 1997, the LOX released We'll Always Love Big Papa, a song chosen as the B-side to Puff Daddy's I'll Be Missing You, and it achieved major commercial success. That success paved the way for their debut album Money, Power, and Respect in 1998, which debuted at number 3 on the Billboard 200 and earned platinum certification. Despite the success, the LOX were unhappy with Bad Boy's polished production style. They felt it ran counter to the gritty street sound they stood for. After their debut album, the group left Bad Boy to sign with Rough Riders, releasing We Are the Streets. In 2000, an album that was rougher and closer to their true identity. In 2001, Jadakiss began his solo career with Kiss the Game. Goodbye. The album sold very well-earned gold certification and moved more than 200,000 copies in its first week. However, critical response was lukewarm. Jadakiss openly admitted the album was made more out of contractual obligation than inspiration. 3 years later, he returned with Kiss of Death. This album elevated Jadakiss to a different level, especially with the song Why, one of the biggest hits of 2004. The track was not only commercially successful, but also pushed Jadakiss's name beyond pure rap circles and into broader social debates. From a boy pushed into the real world too early to earn his own money, Jadakiss walked a path that was anything but straight. And it was those uneven steps that shaped a far more complex figure than the street rapper image people often assume. But even at the peak, it was never a smooth road. The legend collapses, and the real descent into hell. In 2004, America had not yet awakened from 9/11. The atmosphere felt like a room that had just survived a massive explosion. Everyone spoke more quietly. Everyone avoided sensitive questions. Any suspicion involving George W. Bush, the government, or theories surrounding September 11th was considered crossing a moral line. Right or wrong did not matter. Simply asking the question was enough to be seen as unpatriotic. In that context, Jadakiss released the song, Why. It was not a technical rap showcase, not a diss track, not a political manifesto. But there was one line, just one, that shifted everything. Jadakiss did not accuse. He did not conclude. He did not declare who was right or wrong. He asked a question about presidential responsibility for the Tower tragedy. And in 2004, that question became a bomb. The danger was not in the lyric itself, it was in the right to ask. When an entire nation was trying to seal its pain with silence, a street rapper daring to ask why was seen as provocation. Not because he was wrong, but because he spoke at the wrong time by the system's standards. Mainstream media reacted almost immediately. The Washington Post described the song as having raised a ruckus igniting controversy. Notably, the article did not analyze melody or flow. It analyzed social impact. Why would a rapper dare ask what politicians avoided? Why did that question end up on the radio between entertainment records? Then Fox News stepped in. Bill O'Reilly brought Jadakiss on air and directly labeled him a smear merchant, accusing him of slandering and inciting doubt against the government. From that moment on, Jadakiss was no longer viewed simply as a rapper. He was pushed into another category, a political agitator, a problematic figure. At the same time, censorship signals appeared. Radio stations demanded clean versions. The name Bush was censored. Some stations refused to play the song at all. This was extremely rare in hip-hop at the time. Why contained no profanity. It did not incite violence. It carried no racial hatred. Yet it was cut solely for political content. Inside the music industry, everyone understood clearly. Jadakiss had touched something that was no longer just rap. The American public split in two. One side called him irresponsible, accused him of exploiting a national tragedy for attention. Some conservative groups and veterans called for boycotts. The other side, the hip-hop community and street culture, saw it as the voice of the people, a legitimate doubt. Many rappers quietly supported him, but almost none dared to speak publicly. Jadakiss was isolated in the media arena even as the song continued to spread. How he responded was what truly mattered. Jadakiss did not apologize. He issued no statement. He did not blame the label. He did not pull the record. He held his position. I only asked a question. I did not say it was the truth. After that, he entered a controlled silence. No confrontations on Fox News. No participation in political debates. He avoided mainstream television appearances for a time. This was not running away. This was a survival strategy. Music became his only defense. Jadakiss continued to rap, but he did not write another political track like Why. Still, the image of the rapper who dared to ask could not be erased. The long-term consequences were clear. Before 2004, he was a street lyricist, a rapper's rapper. After 2004, he became a name that could cause trouble. Less favored on pop radio, not welcomed in politically safe spaces. Yet in return, Why became a legacy, a cultural symbol whenever people discuss rap and politics. about the boundaries of free speech, about the price of asking questions inside a forbidden zone. One rap line making no claim at all, yet powerful enough to permanently change how America viewed Jadakiss. The year 2004. Tragedies one after another. In July of 2004, not long after, Y pushed Jadakiss's name into the center of a political storm. Something else happened. No stage, no microphone, no lights. Just a nighttime traffic stop in North Carolina. A completely routine traffic stop, at least on paper. According to later reports compiled by Billboard and Rolling Stone, Jadakiss's car was pulled over by police. There was no chase, no gunfire, no resistance. Everything followed standard procedure. But during the inspection, officers found marijuana and firearms in the vehicle. That alone was enough to send the story in a different direction. For an ordinary person, this could have been a low-level legal incident handled quietly. But the person pulled over that night was anything but ordinary. Within hours, the name Jadakiss appeared in headlines. And the way the story was told quickly became more important than the incident itself. The detail that caused the situation to explode beyond necessity lay in one line. Rolling Stone emphasized clearly. Jadakiss took responsibility for both the guns and the pot. He accepted responsibility for both the firearms and the marijuana. He did not blame anyone else in the car. He did not say it's not mine. He did not try to dodge it. In street logic, that is taking the weight, one person stepping up to absorb the trouble so others are not dragged in. But in media and legal logic, that same action was read very differently. It became an admission of wrongdoing. Two worlds, two interpretations, and Jadakiss standing right at the intersection. The media quickly turned this into a perfect story. Most headlines followed the same structure. Rapper who questioned 9/11 arrested on gun and drug charges. No one separated the traffic stop from Y. The two events were fused into a single narrative. Jadakiss was boxed into a convenient image. Political rapper guns marijuana and social risk. Few articles mentioned that it was simply a traffic stop. Almost no one analyzed the actual legal severity of the incident. Those details were unnecessary for the story the media wanted to tell. They needed an image. And that image was already there. A rapper who had dared to question 9/11 now breaking the law. For many newsrooms, this was bait rather than news. Public reaction split immediately. Critics, especially conservative groups already angered by Y treated this as proof. Typical rapper. Talks politics but lives outside the law. Exactly the stereotype hip-hop is trying to escape. Those lines appeared everywhere. On the other side, street culture saw it differently. To them, this was real life unrelated to music or politics. Many fans said one simple thing. At least he did not run from responsibility. He did not hide. He did not push someone else forward. But there was a deeper layer few spoke about at the time. While Y was still making the government and media uneasy, Jadakiss was already under watch. And now, with a concrete legal violation, things became much easier for those who wanted to monitor, control, or label him. No ideological debate needed, no political rebuttal required, just a legal record. That night in North Carolina did not send Jadakiss to prison for years, but it left a mark. From then on, every time his name appeared, it no longer stood alone. It always carried a lingering question. Was this just a personal mistake? Or the perfect excuse for a system already uncomfortable with how many questions he dared to ask? A shocking legal scandal. By 2006, Jadakiss was no longer a name. American society was merely keeping an eye on. He had been through too much to be considered unknown. Y in 2004 placed him in a politically sensitive zone. The North Carolina traffic stop that same year created an uncomfortable legal precedent. In the eyes of police and the press, Jadakiss was no longer simply an artist, but a familiar face. And once someone becomes familiar, even minor deviations are easily magnified. The irony was that the next incident did not happen in a distant state, but right in Yonkers, his hometown. The place that should have been home turf filled with familiar faces and old streets became the most sensitive point of all. Once you are labeled, there is no absolute safe zone, not even where you were born. According to local reports and later summaries by Billboard Yonkers, police stopped a vehicle in which Jadakiss was riding with several others. The initial reason recorded in the report sounded familiar. Officers said they smelled marijuana, a common justification for searching a vehicle. During that search, they found marijuana. More importantly, they discovered a loaded .38 caliber handgun. And it did not stop there. The gun had also been reported stolen. Those 3 words alone, stolen loaded gun, were enough to completely change the nature of the case. This was no longer a minor infraction, no longer a light suspicion. With that detail, police had full grounds to make an on-the-spot arrest and move the case towards serious criminal charges. Jadakiss and the others in the car were handcuffed. At that moment, no conclusions were needed. The arrest itself was enough. What followed unfolded almost exactly like a familiar script. The news spread, and headlines moved faster than any legal development. Jadakiss arrested in Yonkers on gun and marijuana charges. Short, strong, easy to understand, and dangerous. No one waited for investigative results. No one analyzed who actually owned the gun. No one emphasized that multiple people were in the car and ownership had not been established. In the public eye, the story seemed finished on day 1. The media quickly reused the old narrative: rapper, gun, marijuana. A sequence so familiar it required no explanation. Articles directly linked the case back to 2004, recalling North Carolina reviving the image of a troubled street rapper. They did not need new details. Just repeating the name was enough to trigger all the previous negative memory. Public reaction followed, but this time it was not unified like 2 years earlier. Critics sounded tired. Again, he learned nothing. Those reactions came almost reflexively. But on the other side, something new began to surface. Doubt. Was the gun really his? Why do headlines always come before verdicts? For the first time, a segment of the public did not immediately accept the ready-made story. After the initial wave, the case entered a phase few noticed. No major press conferences, no loud courtroom drama. Media coverage gradually faded. But it was precisely in that quiet stretch that the most important things were happening. DNA testing was conducted. Connections between the defendants and the firearm were examined carefully. This was the stage with no headlines and no cameras. Yet it would determine the entire legal fate of the case. Time passed in silence. Then, in 2007, a turning point arrived. Billboard and The Hollywood Reporter simultaneously reported that prosecutors dropped the gun and drug charges against Jadakiss. The core reason lay in the investigation results. DNA did not link Jadakiss to the gun. Other defendants were also not proven to be directly connected. In fact, one individual in the case was acquitted by a jury. Legally, the outcome was clear. No conviction, no prison sentence, no new criminal record. Jadakiss was not proven to be the owner of the firearm. But here is the paradox. When the truth was confirmed, headlines stopped running. No bold titles, no heated debates. Silence returned, but this time with a different aftertaste. What remained was not a verdict, but an image. A man once arrested in North Carolina. A rapper who stirred controversy with why. A name already too familiar to police and the press. Even without a conviction, Jadakiss understood one thing clearly. Home was no longer a safe zone. Once you are placed under a microscope, every movement is magnified. Every suspicion can become truth in the public eye. At least until a new headline comes along to replace it. The Yonkers case of 2006 did not destroy Jadakiss's career, but it left a quiet imprint. A reminder that in that society, being cleared does not mean being erased from memory. Once your name has been attached to a story long enough escaping, it depends not on a court ruling, but on the memory of the crowd. And that memory is often very slow to correct itself. Bad Boy, a tearful goodbye. When people mention the slogan, "Free the Elox," the story is often told in a very polished way. 3 young artists standing up for creative control, escaping a suffocating contract, reclaiming their artistic voice. But if you look more closely at that moment, there is another layer of truth that rarely gets discussed. They were not just seeking freedom, they were looking for a way out. By the late 1990s, Jadakiss and the LOX were standing in a very strange position. On the surface, they were Bad Boy Records favorites, appearing on major hits, part of the famous shiny suit era, money, fame, status. But behind those lights, nothing was as secure as it seemed. Bad Boy was not wrong. Puff Daddy was not a simple artist exploiter. He understood the market. He knew how to turn artists into mass products. And that was exactly the problem for the LOX. They were not born to be polished. They carried an energy that was too raw, too real, too street to sit comfortably inside a carefully calculated frame. What few people noticed was that the Free the LOX moment also coincided with the time when personal trouble and controversy began sticking to Jadakiss. Encounters with police, side stories, cautious looks from the media. When an artist becomes hard to manage, the system quietly changes how it treats them. No announcements, no statements, just less protection, less favoritism, fewer people stepping in to take the hit. In a collective like Bad Boy, where image was everything, the LOX gradually became an uncomfortable variable. Not because they lacked talent, but because they did not fit the story the label wanted to tell. When things are going well, you are part of the team. When trouble appears, you start to feel slightly off to the side. Free. The LOX, therefore, was not just a slogan about creative rights. It was a survival response. A way of saying that if they stayed, they would either be bent to fit the mold, or worse, abandoned when they no longer fit. In this industry, no one tells you outright that you are being pushed out. You just slowly realize your name is no longer called in important meetings. Bad Boy wanted music that was easy to listen to, easy for radio, easy to sell. The LOX wanted a sound that reflected who they really were. No one was necessarily wrong. But those two directions could not run parallel forever. And when Jadakiss began carrying the image of being trouble, that distance only grew wider. The Free. The LOX campaign looked like rebellion on the surface, but at a deeper level, it was an admission that they were no longer being shielded the way they once were. When you are in a sensitive phase, the system tends to choose the safest option for itself. And safety in this case meant distance. Leaving Bad Boy was not about money, not just about creative control. It was because the LOX understood that if they stayed, they would slowly be turned into a softer version of themselves. Or worse, become a liability that no one wanted to take responsibility for when the storm hit. When they moved to Rough Riders, it was not the grand move the press made it out to be. It was the choice of people who wanted to be themselves, even if it meant giving up safety. Rough Riders did not promise the glossy spotlight Bad Boy offered, but they gave the LOX something more important: space to exist as who they truly were. Looking back, Free the LOX was not just a story about artistic freedom. It was a very real cross-section of the American music industry. When you are too real, too hard to control, the system faces two options: polish you to fit the mold, or bend you to make you manageable. And if it cannot do either, it leaves you to fend for yourself. For Jadakiss, leaving Bad Boy was also the moment he understood one thing clearly. In this industry, loyalty is never unconditional. When you are at the top, everything feels fine. When scandal appears, you learn who is really standing beside you. And sometimes freedom is not something you win. It is something you are forced to choose before you are left behind. So who was Jadakiss really? After all the scandals, the cold headlines, the times his name appeared next to words like arrested controversial gun drug, one question became impossible to avoid. Not a question for Jadakiss, but a question for us. Because if you strip away the media dust, if you look past the impulsive moments, if you stop viewing him through the lens of handcuffed nights or censored lyrics, who was Jadakiss really? He was not a legendary gangster in the Hollywood sense. Jadakiss never built the image of an untouchable kingpin, never bragged about bloody conquests, or turned violence into medals. What he said in his music were observations, warnings, life lessons lived right at the edge of the street, not invitations to jump off a cliff. If he truly were a gangster in the pure sense, he would not have stopped outside Hot 97 in 2004, and he would not have chosen silence in 2006 when he had every reason to explode. Real gangsters do not stop. Jadakiss did. He was also not a pure victim of the system. Yes, the media boxed him in too quickly. Yes, headlines ran ahead of the truth. Yes, the charges dropped in 2007 were never repeated as loudly as the arrest headlines in 2006. But Jadakiss never stood there crying or begging for sympathy. He never framed his story as a tragedy created by society. He accepted that he chose to live close to the edge, and when you live close to the edge, police lights and camera lenses are never far away. And he was certainly not the political rebel the media once labeled him as. That line in Why was not a manifesto, nor a call for overthrow. It was a question that came from the mind of someone who had grown used to official answers always missing something. Jadakiss did not pursue a political path afterward. He did not write more songs like it. He did not become the voice of a movement or stand at a podium. That makes one thing clear. He was not seeking the role of ideological leader. He simply refused to stay silent when something made him question. So if he did not fit any of those three molds, who was Jadakiss? The truth that emerges, and the most uncomfortable one, is this. Jadakiss was someone who understood boundaries and chose to live right next to them. He understood the line between rap and real life, but also knew they could never be fully separated. He understood the line between a question and an accusation, but also knew that stepping half a step too far would turn society against him. He understood the line between street credibility and self-destruction, and in the most dangerous moments, he stopped before everything slipped out of his hands. That is what makes Jadakiss's journey so hard to read. There was no spectacular collapse, no pre-written redemption arc, no clear moral lesson. Just a man constantly walking a tightrope close enough to feel the cost of falling, but sober enough not to take that final half step. If you look closely, you will see a pattern repeating throughout his career. When scandal broke, Jadakiss did not rush toward the cameras. When he was cleared, he did not come back demanding media justice. When anger peaked, he pulled back. When praise came, he did not use it to build a monument to himself. Those silences were not because he had nothing to say. They were because he understood that sometimes saying more only makes things worse. Maybe that is why Jadakiss never became a mass symbol of either hero or villain. He exists in a gray zone that is hard to tell and hard to package into a neat story. But it is also that gray zone that allowed him to survive decades when so many of his peers disappeared or warped beyond recognition. And maybe that is why we only tend to see Jadakiss when things get loud, when Fox News calls his name, when the press links him to guns and marijuana, when the Philly stage has objects thrown at him. The years when he stayed quiet, made music, toured, kept the LOX alive, kept himself from slipping deeper. Those years rarely get attention. Yet those years are what truly define who he is. So the final question should not be, what did Jadakiss do wrong? But rather, how did we look at him? Did we misunderstand Jadakiss? Or did we simply never watch him long enough in silence? In your view, is Jadakiss a man who always lived too close to the edge, or one of the rare figures in hip-hop who knew when to stop? Leave your perspective, not to judge, but to understand him more deeply.
Today's content may reference public figures, businesses, or social events. However, all mentions are intended for exploratory purposes only and are not meant as accusations or judgments. That's the reality of the game. Fame always comes with a price. If you vibe with the content and want the real uncut stories, go ahead and smash that like button and subscribe to the Black Vault.